So this is going to be my mixing area. We're going to be working what's called wet on wet for this first layer. Okay, this is a multi-layered process. We're going to work light to dark. And it's called a mixed media monotype because we're working with two different kinds of paint. We're working with watercolor and we're working with acrylic. So our first layer is watercolor. And I'm just going to get the paper wet because that's going to allow me to work, as I mentioned, wet to wet, which is going to let my watercolor bleed and do some interesting things for me, which I want, okay? This is an abstract kind of a layer. It's kind of at work, we're going to be working kind of intuitively here. I have my colors figured out. If you don't have your colors figured out in your mind yet, then hold off. Okay, and all I did is I used water and my largest brush to just cover this thing with water, okay? So what I'm doing now is I'm gonna make a layer of hues. So the hues that I wanna work with for my kind of first layer. And on this project, I picked greens, blue, green, blue. For my little demo, I'm using this shell as my inspiration. And I'm actually gonna get the shell wet because when I do that, the colors kind of come alive, right? So kind of like they are when they're at the beach. And I am gonna recreate some of the hues that I see in here. So some of these blues, maybe some of the grays, and there's like a little bit of like a beigey sort of tan thing. Just gonna do some really light layers of that, okay? Here's the demo that I made earlier today. So this is just like a base layer, okay? A base layer where we're making just really soft colors. Again, using your biggest brush. And I'm gonna work really fast. And again, with your watercolors, all of those secondary colors, and if you've got one of the bigger sets, the tertiary colors have been made for you too. Right? So I am going to be working light to dark, so I'm going to be using lots of water. And I'm working into this wet paper, so my color is going to spread all over the place, which is what I want, right? So I'm going to make a little bit of gray. If any of your colors are kind of dingy or dirty like mine, just wipe them out with a wet paper towel. I'm going to take this over to my little mixing tray, add a little bit of black, okay, because there was a little bit of gray in that shell, but I'm going for really soft, just kind of light, and I'm just dabbing the paint on here, okay? When you are working wet on wet, you're dabbing your paint and letting it kind of do its thing.
Does it matter which color you use?
Not really. I mean, if you don't have an object picked out, then you want to pick 2 or 3 colors that are neighbors on the color wheel. Okay? So you don't want like really random colors. So for example, in this one, so Grant was asking, can we pick anything we want? I started off with green, green, and blue. And here's what that first layer, when I was done, let me find it for you. Here's what it looked like. It looked just like this. Okay? Yeah. So the goal is to really like fill your paper. So look at it from different angles and see what's happening. And if it starts getting really soupy, take your paper towel and just dab it, okay? There might be some places where you want to kind of lighten it up or make that sort of, see that texture that gets created there? That's kind of nice. But I want to keep it soft, I want to keep it light, okay, for this layer. It's no longer shiny, so wet that it's shiny. What you want to do is go in and look for some different places where you could maybe add either a tone of your color or a shade of your color, okay? So I am going to pick some spots now, even though I don't have this all the way filled in. I am going to make a shade of this blue that I've been working with. So I'm going to take some of the blue over here to my mixing palette and add some black to it to make a shade. Okay. I'm going to experiment. This is really saturated, but I'm going to now kick it up a little bit of a notch, and I'm going to look for some spots where I can maybe dab some of that in. So maybe there are some shapes that I'm seeing here, but because I got the paper wet, I have a nice base, and I can just let it all kind of bleed, okay? So there are gonna be some other places now where maybe I dab that in, okay? So folks at home, if you have an object that you're working from, you can use that as the inspiration sort of behind your colors. See, I really like how that's bleeding right there. I'm going to take just some water on my brush and just let some of this kind of blend. It's okay if your paper starts to buckle. It's okay. Don't panic. Okay? But I want to keep it about this level of saturation at this point, because I know I'm going to be adding layers to this tomorrow. Tomorrow is when we're going to talk about our cutouts, our stencils, okay? And adding some layers using acrylic paint. So here's what that first layer looks like. I'm going to let this dry completely, and then tomorrow I'll be ready for the next step.